This is In the Loop on Scripps News. I'm Christian Bryant. We're more than a week into 2023, and I'm always a moment away from mistakenly calling this operation newsy. That was then, this is now, so I appreciate your patience. As a treat, we have a ton of great stories coming up this hour, but first, we're tackling a story that could become a bigger issue this year and beyond. We've all heard about the threats brought on by rising sea levels due to climate change. Just a few feet of sea level rise could be enough to put many parts of the US underwater and force a lot of people to relocate. But what many of us don't realize is this isn't decades away. It's already affecting people across the country. And this issue impacts everything from government policy to insurance rates.
When we look at the insurance market, we look at the mortgage market, and we look at the broader way that global economies now are pricing physical risk in terms of climate change, we see this as a cost burden, right? So if you want to live in a very high-risk area, it increasingly becomes a cost burden.
That's Tulane University professor of sustainable real estate and climate relocation expert Jesse Keenan. He explained that those cost burdens are already being felt by consumers.
We have to contextualize this within a broader realm of a lack of affordability for housing all throughout the United States. It's expensive to live in many areas of the United States. Housing is out of reach for a good number of American households. So when you add these additional costs of insurance, mortgage costs, higher rents, all of these things become real economic burdens on people.
And despite people knowing the impacts of this, people are still moving to some of those areas. Florida had the fastest growing population of any state in 2022, even as many of the state's population areas are in low-lying places at risk from sea level rise, and the state is in the path of many hurricanes. A study by the University of Vermont also found that many Americans are moving to areas of the West that are particularly prone to wildfires and drought. While some folks are just starting to consider climate change as a factor in their individual moves, entire communities have already had to relocate. It's leading to government officials forming some policies on the fly. Some of the earliest tests of that have centered around federal or state-recognized tribes. In 2016, the Obama administration offered nearly $50 million to the tribal nation based on Isle de Jean Charles on the south coast of Louisiana. That's the first time ever that the US government undertook a long-term relocation effort tied to climate change. It took several years, with the project running into issues caused by a partnership with the state, but by the end of 2022, most residents have been relocated off the island as rising sea levels quickly take it into the ocean. In 2022, the Department of the Interior planned further in advance, setting up an application process where tribes could apply for funding for relocation efforts. Not every tribe received funding, but 3 tribes received the largest grants of $25 million each: the villages of Newtok and Napakiak, Alaska, and the Quinault Indian Nation on Washington's Olympic Peninsula. For a little more context here, we're bringing in someone who has reported on this for a while. Christopher Flavelle is a reporter for the New York Times. He covers how people, governments, and industries are coping with and adapting to climate change. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us on In the Loop.
Thanks for having me.
What led to the Interior Department creating this process for tribes to apply for relocation grants? And what do we know about this application process?
I think what prompted this program was the need. There's pretty wide consensus that these tribes face really significant problems. And the federal government has said that for a long time. I think what changed was the availability of new money with the infrastructure bill. So I think the Bureau of Indian Affairs said, we've got money. How can we try to use it to aid relocation?
So just out of curiosity here, what is the cost of relocation for those who did get the money? How are we seeing it get used? And if it's not enough to cover the cost of relocation, how exactly are these tribes filling in the gaps?
In no case will this money be enough. Will it cover the entire cost of a tribe relocating? That can be in the tens and in some cases the hundreds of millions of dollars. I think the goal with some of these programs from the Bureau of Indian Affairs was to get some of these tribes further along. So in some cases, they're looking at moving critical infrastructure, and the idea is that the homes will follow. In other cases, they're meant to be sort of more aggressive planning grants. But these problems are so big, and these projects are so big that there probably couldn't ever be one single burst of money that would do it.
Where's the rest of that money coming from? If if this is only, a portion of what's needed to relocate, how exactly are these tribes finding the money to finish the process?
So there's a lot of federal grants that are available for these kinds of projects from FEMA, from HUD, sometimes the Corps of Engineers. I think the idea is that if these tribes have a clear plan and have staff to write the grants and to incorporate the funding, that there is a significant amount of money out there. They'll probably still, in most cases, have to rely on private foundations or philanthropy. In some cases, their own resources.
And as you said, this really hasn't been attempted like this before. What's the process like of actually finding a place to relocate?
In most cases that I'm familiar with, the new location isn't all that far away from the current town or the current village. The goal is not just to find a way for these communities to stay safe. The goal is to find a way for them to be safe, but to remain communities and to remain on lands that has significant value to them. So, it's an incredibly thorny problem, because if the only goal was safety, the government could say, we'll pay you to live anywhere else, but you would destroy the community.
I know in one of your stories you mentioned how this program could become a template for future managed relocations run by the federal government. How might this translate to bigger relocations in the future?
So the main two federal agencies that do this work, HUD and FEMA, they both have huge amounts of money that they spend on moving individual homes. They call them buyouts. And both agencies have said they want to do broader scale, sort of community scale relocation. I think what both agencies fear is the perception that the federal government is swooping into a community that's threatened by climate change and telling people what to do. The thing that really is important to stress is, as the effects of climate change get worse, there's going to be more and more need and more demands for people to relocate their lives. I think the government's aware of that. And I think, from what I can tell, there's a genuine concern to try to meet those needs in a way that respects the wishes of people who are involved. I think the real question will be, can they do it?
Christopher Flavelle is a reporter for the New York Times covering how people, governments, and industries are coping with climate change. Christopher, thank you again for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks so much.